My name is Ashley Miller. I'm 41 years old, and I can't recall the last time my family saw me cry. Probably not since Dad's funeral in Denver, 15 years ago. That was the day the lines were drawn, quietly and irreversibly. After that, I became the relative who didn't live up to her potential, the cautionary tale that was whispered about at Thanksgiving when the wine was flowing and everyone felt bold enough to nudge old wounds. Tonight, though, things were different. Tonight, I was sitting in the third row of a federal courtroom in downtown Miami, watching my sister's ex-husband, Ryan Carter, stand trial for the kind of betrayal most families can only imagine in nightmares. The courthouse was more fortress than building, gleaming marble floors, thick columns, ceilings so high they seemed designed to make everyone beneath them feel small. Security was tight. Even the vending machines required ID. The cold air carried the faint scent of bleach and coffee. I wore my Miami PD detective suit, a plain navy blazer, charcoal gray slacks, and the same battered black leather shoes I'd owned since my first patrol. My badge and gun, of course, were locked up downstairs in a plastic box marked with my last name in dry erase marker. My hair, reddish-brown and unruly by nature, was yanked into a ponytail so tight it gave me a headache, but at least I didn't look out of place. To most in the courtroom, I was just another anonymous face, maybe a paralegal, maybe a cop on family business, maybe even the disappointing daughter whose family was always a little too loud at weddings. Jessica, my younger sister, sat up front, her blonde hair shining like a magazine ad under the harsh fluorescence. She was clinging to Mom's arm like she might float away if she let go. Mom, ever the Southern matriarch even after 2 decades in Colorado and now Florida, wore her best string of pearls, the ones Dad gave her on their 25th anniversary. It struck me that she always wore them for big occasions, as if they were a kind of armor. She kept glancing back at me with the same expression she'd worn for half my adult life, a mix of pity, frustration, and that chilly sense of obligation you get when you're about to write a check to charity. At least Ashley showed up, I heard her murmur to Jessica. I guess she didn't have anywhere else to be. The words didn't surprise me. My mother has never been good at whispering, and by now, my skin was thick enough to collect these small, casual cruelties the way some people collect ticket stubs from old concerts. You'd think it would hurt less after all these years, but some wounds don't scar, they just stay open, quietly leaking disappointment. I'd heard the variations for decades. Ashley's the wild card. Ashley never finished anything she started. Ashley's still trying to figure herself out at 42. They said it with just enough concern to sound like love, but it was really a warning. Don't become like her. Don't let your life get away from you. What no one in my family ever knew, what they couldn't possibly know, was that for the past 3 years, I'd been lead detective on the single largest internal affairs operation in Miami PD history. While they thought I was bouncing from one dead-end assignment to another, I'd been running undercover ops, recruiting confidential informants inside military contracting firms, working with the FBI and the Department of Defense to track down the kind of secrets that get people killed. I'd had to watch my own back at every turn, sleep in my car more than once, and keep my mouth shut even when the temptation to say, "You have no idea who I am," was almost unbearable. And now, the man on trial, Jessica's ex, Ryan Carter, was the very reason I'd missed birthdays, skipped baby showers, and seemed so distracted at family dinners. For 18 months, I'd built a case against him while pretending to be just another failed cop with a chip on her shoulder and a mortgage she couldn't afford. The irony stung sometimes, but mostly, I was numb to it. Jessica had married Ryan 5 years earlier, at a hotel in Coral Gables so swanky it had valet parking for the wedding cake. I'd stood in the back, clutching a glass of gin and tonic, watching my little sister introduce her new husband as the brilliant defense contractor. To everyone else, I was just her unmarried, overworked older sibling, the one who'd chosen a stress over a success. She told people I worked for the city, and they'd nod politely, assuming I was issuing parking tickets or directing traffic in a school zone. That was fine. No one ever asked about my work. It was safer that way. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, a stern woman in her 60s, with eyes like blue steel, took her seat. Ryan sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit, looking like someone who still believed this would all blow over by lunchtime. His lawyers leaned in, whispering with their heads together like a football huddle, while Ryan kept glancing back at Jessica with a smile meant to reassure her. He looked bored, maybe even amused. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh out loud. A U.S. Assistant District Attorney named Sandra Martinez stood and began her opening statement. I'd worked with Sandra for months, feeding her intel through back channels, helping her piece together a case that would not only hold up in court, but make sure Ryan Carter never saw the outside of a federal prison again. She was smart, relentless, and not above using a little drama to keep the jury's attention. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as she began, her voice ringing with quiet authority, this is a case about the betrayal of trust, not just between colleagues or friends, but between a man and his country. Jessica squeezed Mom's hand. Ryan finally looked nervous, just a flicker of worry crossing his features before he forced it away. Sandra continued, for 3 years, the defendant systematically exploited his position as a government contractor to sell classified information to foreign agents, endangering the lives of Americans both here and overseas. We will show you bank records, intercepted communications, and evidence of meetings in this very city. As she spoke, I watched Jessica's face pale under her perfect makeup. Mom began shaking her head, the way she did whenever reality collided with her hopes. It's all circumstantial, Jessica whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Ryan said they can't prove any of it. Oh, Jessica, I thought. He told you what he needed you to believe, because that's what men like Ryan always do. They're sure they are too clever, too charming, too important to ever get caught. They count on people not paying attention, especially their own family. Sandra started laying out the case with surgical precision, wire transfers to shadowy offshore accounts, intercepted emails encrypted but ultimately traceable, classified documents found in Ryan's office, all of it painting a picture so clear even a second-year law student could see it. But I knew the real knockout punch was still to come. Sandra paused only for effect, then signaled for her first witness. The prosecution calls Lieutenant Lorraine Bennett, Miami Police Department. The moment Lorraine entered, I felt the shift in the courtroom. Lorraine isn't just my boss. She's a legend in Miami PD, silver-haired, unreadable, calm under fire. Her file reads like a movie script, decorated medals, undercover stings, hostage rescues. Yet to my family, she was just another anonymous civil servant in an unremarkable pantsuit. Jessica and Mom didn't recognize her, of course. They probably saw her as some minor bureaucrat, someone who shuffled papers and scheduled budget meetings. They couldn't know that Lorraine was the engine behind every major investigation in our division, or that she was the one who'd recruited me, convinced me I wasn't a failure for leaving law school, and turned me into one of the department's most trusted detectives. Lorraine was sworn in, took her seat, and answered the prosecutor's first questions with calm professionalism. I oversee internal affairs and counterintelligence operations within the Miami Police Department, she said. Her voice was low, steady, impossible to rattle. And how long have you been supervising the investigation into Mr. Carter? Sandra asked. 3 years, 2 months, and 9 days, Lorraine replied without hesitation. During that time, we conducted covert surveillance, collaborated with federal agencies, and developed multiple confidential sources. We identified Mr. Carter as a primary suspect in an ongoing intelligence breach. Jessica sat up straighter. I could see her struggling to connect the words, intelligence breach, covert surveillance, Ryan, with the man she thought she'd married. Mom pressed her lips together, trying to hide a tremor in her hands. They'd never really believed the world I lived in was real. They preferred to think of police work as traffic tickets and parades, not espionage and betrayal. Sandra leaned in for the next question. Was there an undercover operative assigned to develop evidence against Mr. Carter? Lorraine nodded, and the air changed again. Yes. We placed an officer inside his circle under deep cover. She built trust over 18 months and obtained direct evidence. The silence grew so thick you could almost hear it. Lorraine didn't look at me, not yet, but I knew what was coming. I glanced at Jessica and Mom. Both were staring at Lorraine, then at Ryan, whose confident facade was starting to crack. The lawyers were shifting in their seats. Sandra smiled. Is that undercover operative present in the courtroom? Yes, Lorraine said, finally glancing in my direction. Would you please identify her for the court? Lorraine didn't hesitate. Detective Ashley Miller, seated in the 3rd row. A single moment, yet it stretched into eternity. Heads swiveled. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mom's eyes widened in confusion and something else, a flicker of realization, maybe even fear. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching. Even Ryan seemed frozen, unable to process what was happening. For 15 years, my family's attention had drifted over me like I was furniture. Now, every eye was on me, really on me. Not the disappointment, not the Raphaelia, but the woman who had been living a double life to keep them safe. I stood, my hands surprisingly steady. My training took over. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear in the silent courtroom. May I approach? The judge, her expression unreadable, nodded. Please do, Detective Miller. I walked past Jessica, her face streaked with tears, past Mom, who looked like she might faint, and past Ryan, whose world was finally collapsing. At the bench, I handed over my official credentials, Miami PD, Internal Affairs, Task Force Lead. Credentials my family had never seen, because no one had ever really asked. The judge examined them, then looked up. Detective Miller, you'll be testifying as the prosecution's primary witness? Yes, Your Honor. I have 18 months' worth of evidence, including recorded conversations, photographs, and financial records directly linking Mr. Carter to the breach. A ripple moved through the room, astonishment, admiration, even a little pride from people who'd never met me. But what mattered most was my family's reaction. Jessica's breath came in ragged gasps. Mom was clutching her pearls, eyes shimmering with something I'd never seen before. Maybe regret. After I returned to my seat, Sandra called another witness. The trial pressed on, but I hardly noticed. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the afterthought at the end of the table, or the ghost at Thanksgiving. I was the detective who'd spent sleepless nights documenting a traitor, the cop who'd chosen country over comfort, and, for a while, chosen duty over family. During the lunch break, I barely made it into the hallway before Jessica cornered me. Her mascara was smeared, her eyes red. "How could you?" she hissed, grabbing my arm. "How could you do this to us?" I looked at her, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. She was still the pretty, perfect little sister I remembered, but now she seemed so much smaller, so much more fragile. "I did my job, Jess," I answered. "Ryan destroyed himself. I just did what needed to be done." "You could have found another way. You lied to us." "Did I?" I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "When was the last time you or Mom asked what I actually do? When did any of you treat me like I was part of this family, instead of the one who never measured up?" Jessica winced, tears flowing faster. "At your wedding," I continued softly, "you introduced Ryan as a genius, and me as someone who works for the city. That same day, I was running surveillance on 3 foreign agents targeting military families in Tampa. You never cared enough to ask." Mom appeared at Jessica's shoulder, her composure shaken. "Ashley, surely, you didn't have to be so secretive." The word landed between us like a slap. "He was selling out his country," I replied. "My job was to catch him. That meant protecting you, both of you, from being collateral damage in a federal investigation. That's what family is supposed to do." The rest of the trial unfolded like a movie on fast forward. I watched from the gallery, a strange sense of calm settling over me even as the prosecution played audio recordings and showed surveillance photos, evidence I'd gathered, reviewed, and catalogued for what felt like a lifetime. Every word, every image, was another piece of my own life. Missed holidays, late-night drives through rain-slicked Miami streets, the numb ache that comes from pretending you're less than you are so you can protect people who think they know you. But now, everything was on the record. My family saw every late night, every secret meeting, every risk I'd taken. I saw Jessica's face pale as the jury listened to Ryan discussing classified contracts with foreign agents, his voice low and cocky. I saw Mom's hands tremble as my name came up again and again, not as the disappointment, but as the investigator who'd made the case airtight. Ryan's lawyers did their best to rattle me on the stand, implying that my relationship to Jessica made me biased or vengeful. But the evidence spoke for itself. I kept my answers calm, measured. Yes, I was related by marriage, I explained. But my duty was always to the truth, to the badge, and to my oath. There was nothing left for them to twist. During a recess, while the lawyers huddled over yellow legal pads, I found myself staring at the court seal above the judge's bench, a bold eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, the stars and stripes shield bright against the marble. I'd walked into this job as a 23-year-old rookie, still haunted by my dad's sudden death and my mom's disapproval. I'd thought being a cop would give me respect, maybe even make my family proud. Instead, it taught me to stand on my own, even if no one ever applauded. That afternoon, after hours of testimony, the judge called another break. I stepped into the hallway, expecting to be alone, but Mom was waiting for me by the vending machines, her purse clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't look up when I approached. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the hum of the soda machine the only sound. "Ashley," she finally said, her voice thinner than I remembered. "I never understood what you did for work. I never asked. I just assumed." I waited, not wanting to make this any easier for her. For years, I'd waited for even a scrap of recognition, One moment where she saw me, not the story she told herself about me. "I'm proud of you," a mom said, her voice trembling. "I should have said it years ago. I was wrong. About a lot of things." I wanted to feel triumphant, but the words just left me hollow. It was like being handed a trophy after the stadium had emptied, the lights already turned off. Important, but too late to matter as much as it should have. "Thank you," I managed. "But Mom, this isn't over. I have to go back in there. I have to finish what I started." She nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Will you come to dinner this Sunday? Please. Just come." I hesitated, measuring her guilt against my own exhaustion. "I'll try. I just need some time, okay?" She squeezed my hand, really squeezed, not just the polite gesture she reserved for holiday photos. For the first time, I believed she meant it. The verdict came after 3 more days of testimony. Ryan was found guilty on all counts: espionage, conspiracy, theft of government property. Jessica didn't come to the final day. I think she knew it would be too much to bear. Mom sat straight-backed and silent, her eyes fixed on the bench as the judge pronounced a 25-year sentence. When the courtroom emptied, I found myself walking out into the Florida heat, blinking against the bright sky, my badge heavy in my pocket. It should have felt like the end of a story, but I knew better. There's always another case, always another storm. 3 weeks later, I showed up at Mom's townhouse for Sunday dinner. Jessica was already there, quieter than I'd ever seen her. The air was thick with everything unsaid. We sat around the table, the clatter of forks and glasses louder than any conversation. Finally, Mom asked about my work, not out of politeness, but with real curiosity. I told them a little, about the training, about the long nights and the pressure, about what it meant to know your decisions could save, or cost, lives. Jessica listened, her eyes never leaving mine. She asked how I'd managed to stay undercover so long, how I'd kept it all a secret. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a beginning, a chance for them to meet the real me, the woman behind the badge. After dinner, Jessica walked me out to my car. She hesitated, then finally spoke. "I keep thinking about all those times Ryan would make jokes about cops, about how easy your job must be. I'm sorry I never saw what you were really doing. I'm sorry I never asked." "We can work on that," I said. "If you want to." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'd like that." Driving home through the Miami night, I rolled down the window and let the humidor wash over me. For years, I'd kept my world separate, family in one box, my career in another, never letting the two meet. It was exhausting, being invisible in plain sight, the person no one truly saw. But now, maybe, I didn't have to hide anymore. My phone buzzed, a text from Lorraine. Excellent work on Carter. Debrief Monday 8 a.m. New assignment coming. For the first time in my life, I wondered what it would be like to tell my family about my next case. Carefully, appropriately, but honestly. Maybe that was the real victory. Not the guilty verdict, not even the late-breaking pride in my mother's eyes, but knowing I'd built a life that mattered, whether anyone noticed or not. And that, I thought, was the kind of justice I could live with. For days after the verdict, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Jessica had looked at me as I left Mum's house, uncertainty mixed with hope, as if she was finally trying to piece together a sister she'd never really known. In all the years I'd spent living two lives, I told myself that the distance was for their protection. But deep down, I'd always longed for someone to actually see the person beneath the badge. Miami in early spring is a place of contrasts, neon and ocean breeze, the low drone of traffic on I-95 mixed with the laughter of kids running past pastel-painted porches. After the case, I took some overdue vacation and walked the neighborhoods at dusk, feeling oddly anonymous. I watched mothers call their children in for dinner, neighbors carry groceries, teenagers race skateboards down empty sidewalks. Most people glanced right past me, a middle-aged woman in jeans and a windbreaker, just another part of the city's endless churn. And yet, everywhere I went, I caught snatches of conversations about that big spy case, about the detective who was secretly family. Some people thought I'd been a hero. Others whispered that I'd betrayed my own blood. I heard one woman at a cafe say, "You'd never catch me turning in my brother-in-law, no matter what he did." Her friend replied, "You don't know what you do until you see what's at stake." Did I do the right thing? The question haunted me more than I liked to admit. I'd built my whole life on the principle that justice and loyalty didn't have to be opposites. I still wanted to believe that. Back at the station, I found my desk covered with post-its and files. My squad had decorated my locker with a "Congratulations, Legend," a banner, mostly as a joke, but the respect in their eyes was real. I never thought I'd earn that, at least not in the eyes of people who spent most of their careers being underestimated. Lorraine Bennett called me into her office. "Take the win, Miller," as she said, her grey eyes amused. Not everyone gets to see their work make that kind of difference. "It feels strange," I admitted. "Like everyone's looking at me, but no one really knows what it cost." Lorraine leaned back in her chair. "You did your job. That's what matters. The rest is just noise. Let your family process it at their own pace." "Will they ever?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. She considered me a long moment. "Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes people can only see you for who you used to be. Doesn't change what you've become." On Monday, I got my new assignment, Internal Task Force on Public Corruption, a chance to root out dirty cops and city officials who thought the law didn't apply to them. It was good, honest work, the kind that had drawn me to the badge in the first place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being unmoored, like the story I'd spent years living was suddenly over, and no one knew what would come next. That Friday, I stood in line at the grocery store, holding a carton of eggs and a bag of oranges. I spotted Jessica 2 lanes over, picking up flowers and a bottle of red wine. For a second, I considered ducking away. Old habits die hard, but she saw me first. She hesitated, then walked over. Her hair was pulled back, face clean of makeup, dressed in a worn blue hoodie. She looked younger, softer, more real than I'd seen her in years. "Hey, Ash," she said. Her voice was tentative, but there was a trace of a smile. "I was just about to call you." I managed a small smile in return. "Yeah. About what?" Jessica shifted the bouquet from one hand to the other. "I wanted to say thank you. I know it probably sounds weird, but I needed to say it. For a long time I thought you just didn't care about us. Turns out you were doing more for this family than any of us realized." The line inched forward. We stepped along with it, the awkwardness between us dissolving, replaced by something warmer. "Jess, I'm sorry you had to find out like that," I said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know. I get it now," She took a shaky breath. Ryan fooled me. I didn't want to see what he was doing, and I let him convince me you were just jealous or stubborn. That wasn't fair. I shrugged. He fooled a lot of people. That's what he was good at. She nodded, blinking back tears. I'm not mad at you, Ash. I'm mad at myself. For not asking more, for not listening. I'd like to try again, if you're willing. Yeah, I said, more relieved than I'd expected. Me too. We paid for our groceries together, making small talk about the weather, old teachers, the neighbor's dog who still barked at passing bikes. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in years. Outside, as we loaded bags into our cars, Jessica hugged me tightly. Don't disappear this time, okay? I smiled against her shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. That night, back in my apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay, I sat on the balcony with a glass of iced tea, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. I thought about Dad, how he'd always said courage wasn't loud or flashy, but about doing what's right even when it's hard. I missed him. I wondered what he'd say now, if he'd be proud of the person I'd become, even if it wasn't the life anyone expected. My phone chimed. A group text from Mom. Family dinner on Sunday at 6. Ashley, can you bring your famous key lime pie? Jessica says you're finally willing to share the recipe. Love. Mom. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing across the quiet water. Maybe this was what rebuilding looked like. Not dramatic, not instant, but slow and real. One honest conversation, one meal, one act of forgiveness at a time. For the first time in years, I let myself believe that being seen, truly seen, was possible. And it felt like hope. Family dinner on Sunday felt like walking onto a stage where all the actors had forgotten their lines. The house smelled of roast chicken and lemon Polish, just like when we were kids, but there was a new tension in the air, a waiting, a watching. I'd brought my key lime pie as requested, but as I placed it on the kitchen counter, I felt the eyes of my family tracking my every move. Jessica was already setting the table, humming a little off-key. Mom was in the kitchen, obsessively checking the oven timer. The sight of the two of them, side by side, made me pause at the doorway for a moment. Mom's hair had more grey in it than I remembered, and Jessica's shoulders seemed permanently hunched, as if bracing for bad news. We sat down to eat, the familiar clatter of forks and clinking glasses trying to cover up what was really on everyone's mind. For a while, the conversation was stilted. Safe topics, old stories, weather, neighborhood gossip. But slowly, as the meal wore on and the wine loosened everyone's nerves, the conversation turned. Mom started it. She set her glass down, cleared her throat, and looked at me with something like vulnerability. Ashley, I want to ask you something, she said, her voice thin. How did you do it? How did you keep all of that from us? I took a deep breath, unsure how much to reveal. It wasn't easy, Mom. But the job demanded it. Undercover work means living two lives. Sometimes I wished I could tell you, but I knew if I did, none of you would be safe. And honestly, I didn't think you'd believe me. You never really asked. The silence that followed was thick. Jessica stared at her plate, but Mom didn't look away. I'm sorry, Ashley. I should have been more curious. I was so busy worrying about how things looked from the outside that I never thought to look closer at my own daughters. I see that now. Jessica added quietly, "You were always braver than the rest of us." The words surprised me. I searched her face for sarcasm, but there was none, just sadness and a kind of respect that had never been there before. Mom reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but she held on tightly. "I wish your father could see you now," she whispered. "He'd be so proud." A lump formed in my throat. I remembered my dad's hugs, his rough hands, the way he'd say, "Ash, you'll figure out your own path." I missed him every day, especially now. The conversation opened up after that. Jessica asked about my work, real questions, not just polite filler. I told her about the training, the surveillance, the strain of living under an assumed identity. I told her about the fear, too, what it was like to come home at 3 a.m., park my car blocks away just in case, double-check the locks, sleep with my service pistol within reach. Jessica listened, her eyes wide. "I can't imagine living like that. Didn't you ever want to just quit?" I nodded. More times than I can count. But someone had to do it. And, honestly, it gave me a purpose. Even when the people closest to me didn't understand, I knew I was making a difference. Mom dabbed at her eyes. "We failed you, Ash. We were so focused on what you hadn't done, degrees, marriage, kids, that we ignored what you were actually achieving." It was a relief and a sadness to hear those words. The dinner ended with laughter, tentative, but real. Jessica asked if she could help with the pie recipe after all, and we washed dishes together like old times. It wasn't forgiveness all at once, but it was a start. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with Mom. The Miami night was muggy and full of distant sirens and crickets. She poured us each a cup of chamomile tea. "I want you to promise me something," she said. I glanced at her, wary. "What's that?" "Promise me you won't shut us out again, not completely. Even if we don't understand, even if we say the wrong thing, I want you here. I want you in our lives." I looked up at the moon, feeling a heaviness lift from my chest. "I promise, Mom. But I need you to meet me halfway. Don't judge me for being different. Ask questions. Try to understand." She nodded. "That's fair. I can try." We sat there quietly for a long time, listening to the distant rumble of thunder over the bay. Eventually, Mom squeezed my hand and stood up to go inside. I stayed outside a little longer, feeling the warm breeze and letting myself believe, for the first time in years, that maybe things could really change. Monday morning, I was back at my desk. Coffee in hand, sifting through case files. Lorraine popped her head into my office, a rare smile on her face. "How's family life treating the famous Detective Miller?" she teased. I grinned, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Complicated, but better." She tossed a file onto my desk. "Good. Because Miami's not getting any safer, and I need my best on this." I picked up the file and started to read, feeling the old thrill return. My worlds were finally beginning to blend, not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. And as I turned to the next page, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of routine and transformation. In some ways, my life returned to normal: morning coffee runs with squad mates, late-night briefings, the endless churn of paperwork and strategy meetings that made up the backbone of police work. Yet everything felt just a little bit different. I could feel it in the way my colleagues looked at me, with a new level of respect and trust. I saw it in Lorraine's subtle nod when I spoke up at task force meetings, and in the small but meaningful invitations to after-hours drinks or weekend softball games. But the biggest change was inside me. I'd carried the weight of being an outsider for so long that I hardly recognized myself now that it was starting to lift. There were still moments of loneliness. Habits built over decades don't disappear overnight. But now, there was a thread of connection tying me to both worlds. I found myself sharing small details about my work with Mom and Jessica, letting them in just a little more each week, testing the boundaries of this new openness. One Saturday afternoon, Jessica invited me over to her new place, a small, sunlit apartment not far from Brickell Avenue, with mismatched furniture and a view of the skyline. She looked lighter, freer, as if losing Ryan had allowed her to reclaim a piece of herself. We sat on her tiny balcony, sipping iced tea, and for the first time in years, she asked about my life, not out of obligation, but genuine curiosity. "What's the hardest thing about being undercover?" she wanted to know. I considered the question carefully. Probably losing track of who you are. When you spend 18 months living someone else's story, telling their lies, you start to wonder where the mask ends and you begin. There were days I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize myself. Jessica nodded. I felt that way with Ryan. He made me doubt my own instincts, my own worth. I guess we both had to play roles, just to survive. We shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from realizing how much you've both changed. Then, after a pause, Jessica surprised me. "Do you ever think about starting over? Not just at work, but really starting fresh somewhere new?" I looked out over the city, the palm trees, the neon lights beginning to flicker on as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But this is home. For better or worse, Miami's my city. And I think I finally have a reason to stay." That Monday at work, Lorraine assigned me to lead a new sub-team on the corruption task force. Our first case was a slippery one, a city contracts officer suspected of taking kickbacks in exchange for construction permits. It didn't have the drama of espionage, but it mattered just as much. Corruption, left unchecked, was a slow poison. It ate away at the fabric of the community, leaving everyone a little more cynical. I threw myself into the case, coordinating stakeouts and running down leads. I worked long hours, but this time, I made sure to text Mom and Jessica when I could. Sometimes, Mom would reply with a photo of her garden in bloom, or Jessica would send a joke or a song. It was simple, but grounding. One evening, after a marathon shift, I stopped by Mom's for dinner. The table was already set for 3, and the smell of her famous chicken chili filled the house. Jessica was there, too, grading papers. She'd started teaching art classes at a local community center. "Did you know Ash once got suspended for painting a mural on the gym wall?" she said, grinning at Mom. She was 12. I rolled my eyes. "You mean improved the wall? You still have that picture somewhere, don't you?" Mom nodded. "Of course. You always had your own way of seeing the world. I think that's what makes you good at what you do." We ate, we laughed, and we avoided talking about Ryan or the trial. Instead, we built new memories. After dinner, Jessica and I washed dishes, humming old pop songs. It was, for a moment, almost as if we were just two sisters again, not a cop and a civilian, not a hero and the rescued, but equals. Later that night, as I drove home through the city, My phone buzzed. It was Lorraine. A good job today. Meet me at the pier tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. Bring your running shoes. I grinned. Lorraine's mentorship was never just about police work. She had a way of reminding me there was life beyond the badge. I set my alarm for 6 and drifted off to sleep, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like the future was open, not something to dread. At dawn, Miami was a different city. Cool, quiet, the world still yawning awake. Lorraine was waiting at the pier, already stretching. We ran in silence for a while, the slap of our shoes and the steady rhythm of breath grounding me in the present. Finally, she broke the silence. You did what most wouldn't have had the guts to do. You took down someone close to your family. But you also found a way back to them. That's rare. I let her words sink in. Some days, I still wonder if I did the right thing. She slowed, then stopped, turning to face me. Ashley, right doesn't always feel good. But it stands the test of time. You earned your place, at work and at home. I looked out over the water, the sky streaked pink and gold. Thanks, Lorraine. She smiled, clapped me on the back. Now, get ready. There's always another case. As the sun rose higher, I felt a steady certainty settle inside me. There was no going back to who I'd been before. But maybe, just maybe, that was the best gift of all. The weeks rolled on with the slow, heavy heat of a Miami summer. My days were packed with stakeouts, late-night paperwork, endless interviews. The public corruption case grew thornier by the hour. But the difference was in how I faced it, not with the old loneliness, but with the quiet confidence that came from finally being seen, both at home and at work. One Thursday night, I found myself at the City Council building, watching through a pair of binoculars from an unmarked sedan. My partner, Detective Sam Alvarez, was beside me, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. He'd only recently transferred in, but already would built the sort of easy rapport that came from long hours and hard cases. Sam glanced at me. You ever get tired of being right? I smirked, stretching my legs. More than you'd think. But I'd rather be tired than sorry. He grinned, then sobered as a black SUV pulled up to the service entrance. That's our guy. Ready? We watched as the councilman's assistant hurried out, a thick envelope clutched in one hand. The exchange was quick, barely a word spoken. My phone vibrated. Lorraine's message. It got the wire. We've got him on tape. I exhaled, feeling the familiar adrenaline surge. Let's move. Within minutes, we had the assistant in custody. He tried to bluff his way out, but the evidence was too strong. As I read him his rights, I saw something in his eyes, fear, but also relief. Like maybe, deep down, he'd wanted to get court. That night, driving home through rain-slicked streets, I thought about how much had changed. Just a year ago, I might have ended the day with takeout and reruns, hiding behind work because it was easier than facing my family. Now, I found myself dialing Jessica's number. Hey, as she answered, her voice soft but steady. Hey. Just checking in. How's the art class? She laughed. Messy. Some of the kids painted their shoes instead of the canvas. I think they did it on purpose. I smiled, picturing her in paint-splattered jeans, guiding a classroom full of chaos. You sound happier. I am. I'm not there yet, Ash. Not all the way. But I'm getting there. Me too, I admitted. Listen, Mum's been asking about you coming over this weekend. She's making her chicken chili again. Jessica hesitated. Then said, okay. But only if you promise to make that cornbread I love. It's a deal. When we hung up, I realized how rare and precious this simple exchange was. Trust rebuilt not in grand gestures, but in these everyday moments, the check-in calls, the shared jokes, the silent understanding. Saturday came, humid and bright. I spent the morning running case notes at the station, then hurried home to bake the cornbread. By the time I got to Mum's, the house was alive with music and laughter, Jessica already there, helping Mum chop vegetables, teasing her about the amount of hot sauce she used. I joined them, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. We ate, we laughed, we told stories, old and new. Mum asked about my cases, really listening. Jessica shared stories from her art class. I noticed how Mum's eyes sparkled, how Jessica's laugh no longer had a nervous edge. After dinner, we sat out on the porch, the three of us watching the clouds roll in over the bay. Mum reached for my hand. You know, she said, as sometimes I wish your dad could see us now. All of us together. I think he'd be proud. I squeezed her hand, feeling the ache of his absence and the warmth of this new closeness. He always said families weren't built in a day. Or even in a year. But if you show up, if you keep trying, that's what matters. Jessica looked over, her eyes shining. Thank you, Ash, for not giving up on us. There was nothing else to say. The silence between us was finally peaceful, not heavy. A promise that we would keep choosing each other, no matter what. Monday morning, the station was buzzing. News of the councilman's arrest had broken on every local channel. Lorraine met me by the coffee machine, a rare smile creasing her face. Nice work, Miller. Got a call from the chief this morning. They want you to brief the mayor's office. I blinked, surprised. Me? She nodded. You earned this. That afternoon, I stood in a wood-paneled conference room, facing a row of officials and city leaders. For once, I wasn't nervous. I spoke clearly, explaining how we'd built the case, how the evidence had been gathered, how teamwork and persistence paid off. When I finished, the mayor himself stood and shook my hand. Detective Miller, you've restored a lot of faith in this city. Thank you. I thought of all the years I'd spent wanting to be noticed, to be respected. The applause in that room meant something, but not everything. The real victory was waiting for me back at home, around the dinner table, in the laughter of my sister and mother. As I left the building, sunlight broke through the clouds, hot and golden. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, not just in the badge, but in my life. The Miami summer faded into the kind of autumn that only exists in South Florida, still hot, with rainstorms rolling in out of nowhere, but with just enough of a change to feel like a new beginning. At work, my team was busier than ever. With the corruption case making headlines, the department suddenly cared a lot more about the integrity air and a community trust. Lorraine and I spent most of our days in meetings, but the cases kept coming. Petty bribes, city contracts for sale, whispers of organized crime trying to creep back into City Hall. For all the chaos, I felt more grounded than I ever had before. My relationship with Jessica and Mom wasn't perfect, what family ever is. But there was an ease now, a willingness to talk honestly and listen for the truth beneath the words. Sunday dinners were a ritual, and even on the nights I worked late, there'd be leftovers in Mom's fridge with a note. For Ash, don't touch, Jessica. Sometimes Jessica would bring her art projects over, and Mom would ask my opinion on colors and shapes, like it mattered as much as anything I'd done at work. One Friday evening, Lorraine called me into her office. She slid a new file across the desk, thin, but marked urgent. Something big? I asked. She nodded. There's been a rash of home burglaries in Coconut Grove. Normally, that's a case for the local precinct, but the MO is odd. No forced entry, high-value electronics. And only homes with recent city permits pulled. I scanned the notes, feeling my detective instincts click into gear. Inside job? Could be. Or someone with access to the city's permit database. We're supposed to handle it quietly, but the mayor's office is watching. I want you running point. Partner up with Alvarez. He's already started talking to the victims. It wasn't the type of headline-making case I'd grown used to, but I relished the challenge. I left the office feeling energized, ready to dive back into the kind of detailed, ground-level work that first made me fall in love with policing. By the end of the weekend, Sam Alvarez and I had traced a pattern. Every house hit belonged to a family who'd recently had electrical work inspected by the same city contractor, a man named Doug Barrett, who'd retired from the force 10 years earlier and kept his nose just clean enough to avoid suspicion. His alibis were good, but too good. Every timeline lined up a little too neatly. After a week of tailing him, we finally caught Doug meeting with a known fence in a little Havana coffee shop. We moved in fast, cuffing them both before they could even finish their espressos. As I sat across from Doug in the interrogation room, he stared at me with a strange mixture of resentment and weary respect. "You always were a straight arrow, Miller," he said. "Figured you'd end up chasing the bad guys, not cleaning up after your own." I didn't rise to the bait. "Everyone gets a choice, Doug. You made yours." He snorted, looking away. "You'll understand one day. The department doesn't care about old-timers. Sometimes you have to look out for yourself." His words stung, not because I agreed, but because I knew too many officers who felt that way. I finished the paperwork, filed my report, and left Doug to face the consequences of his actions. That night, the heaviness of the day lingered. After years of chasing high-level cases, this one felt personal. Maybe because Doug had once been a mentor to my own academy class. Maybe because I'd finally started to see the blurry line between loyalty and accountability, even in myself. I drove to Mom's, still in my uniform, and found Jessica sitting at the kitchen table, a sketchbook open in front of her. Mom was watching an old crime drama in the living room. "Rough day?" Jessica asked, not looking up. "You could say that," I replied, sliding into the chair beside her. "Ever feel like doing the right thing just makes everything messier?" She grinned. "All the time. But you keep doing it anyway." I laughed, letting the tension go. "You know, for years I thought being a cop would make me the kind of person everyone respected. But it turns out, it just made me the kind of person who had to respect herself, no matter who was watching." Jessica nodded. "That's what it always said, right? You can't control what people think. You can only control what you do next." I looked at her sketch, an abstract, colorful swirl that somehow captured both chaos and hope. Is that how you see the world now? Some days, Ishi admitted. Most days, actually. But it's getting easier. I leaned back, smiling at my little sister. It is, isn't it? We sat there in the quiet, just two sisters sharing the comfort of being understood. Monday morning, the department gave me a commendation for exemplary service. Lorraine made a joke about finally getting me a parking spot close to the building. I accepted the award with a smile, but what mattered most was coming home that night, finding a text from Jessica. Proud of you, Ash. Let's make dinner together tomorrow. Your pick, no key lime pie. I texted back, a deal. But you're in charge of dessert. And for the first time, I realized I was no longer living two lives. I was just living, messy, honest, imperfect, and finally, truly present.